I found this really interesting. My friend who's an ex-vegan, she was vegan mostly for like ethical reasons, but one of the things that she mentioned was like, if you're going to eat meat, eat a cow or an elk or a deer or something rather than like a chicken, because you can, like, I can eat a whole chicken in one day myself. You know what I mean? But eating a whole cow goes so much further, but they're both one life.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like I said, this buck will probably last us like at least 6 months, if not longer. And if we also were to have an elk in the freezer, it would be like well over a year of meat that we would have.
So it's like, if you're going to take a life, you might as well take one life and produce so much nutrient dense food than have to take so many lives and you don't get as much for it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I mean, they're definitely harder to get, but it's also bird season. So we've had some grouse as well. And I've been trying all sorts of new things lately, but the grouse is really good, but they're so small. So he has to get 2 of them for us to be able to have a meal together. So that's two lives for one meal. So the trade-off is not, it doesn't make as much sense. Like it makes more sense to go for the bigger game.
Right. Yeah, it makes so much sense. All right. So what are we really here to talk about today?
We want to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Nothing new to hear that he is just embroiled in controversy lately now because of his nomination as the Health and Human Services Secretary. And you and I have been going back and forth in the DMs about all of the ludicrous claims and fears and slander that is being thrown around about him and about the potential of him in this position. So we wanted to just kind of debunk some of these falsehoods that are being thrown around. I think people are really trying to instill some fear about him in this position. And I don't think we don't need to panic.
I think I sent you an article today. I'm going to pull it up because it was a Time article. And in the first sentence, it's calling him a vaccine skeptic who spreads medical disinformation and conspiracy theories. Like, in the first sentence, the inflammatory rhetoric is, they're going wild with it out here.
Yeah.
It's intense.
And can you tell me what a conspiracy theory is?
Yeah, I find the term so interesting. So a conspiracy theory is technically just a claim that like some type of group or some type of intention has been made to control or manipulate an outcome. We've put so much weight on the term conspiracy theory to make it seem like it's people who believe conspiracy theories are people who are like in their parents' basements, who think that the lizard people are coming to get them, wearing their tinfoil hats, and like really it's just people thinking about very normal things.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a derogatory term since its inception back in like the 60s when people started questioning the assassination of JFK. That literally is the origination of the term conspiracy theory.
Really?
And
I didn't know it like actually originated there.
Yeah, well, the CIA definitely has some involvement in the term conspiracy theory. That's all I'm saying. So since then, it's really been, and I used to really think like conspiracy theories were crazy because I wasn't like looking behind them. I was just taking it at face value and thinking, oh, that's something that sounds crazy. But in recent times has taught us anything, it's that asking questions is a good thing. It's just critical thinking. So just because you are questioning something doesn't make you crazy. It makes
Right.
you curious.
And then we have terms like medical disinformation or misinformation. Who is defining that? Because there are medical experts who say one thing and then medical experts who say another thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
which one's misinformation and disinformation? Like, why does one get the term misinformation and disinformation and one doesn't?
Well, I think one side is just trying to control the narrative. And I mean, I think multiple things can be true at once. That just because one thing is true, that doesn't totally, negate everything else related to it. I think that you have to come at these things with an open mind. So that's our goal, is to have an open mind and do the research, and then it's about making your own informed decisions. And I think what a lot of these fears and claims that we're hearing about RFK Jr. come down to is informed consent. There are people trying to control the narrative and withhold informed consent on some level. And then there are people like RFK that are trying to provide more informed consent to the masses.
The most inflammatory claims that I've seen and the things that has the people the most up in arms are Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s opinions on vaccine, his stance on it, and he believes that people need a little bit more transparency and that people should have choices with vaccines. Now, when we read inflammatory articles from Time, from the New York Times, things like that, a lot of the terms that we see are that he's a vaccine denier. So let's just talk about what is a vaccine denier. I honestly don't even know what that term means.
I think it's just another way of saying that he's anti-vax. Hopefully we're not getting censored now for throwing terms out there. But saying that he is anti-vax, basically. He's a vaccine denier, saying that they don't work or whatever it is. And I think that this is something where you can't just make a wide sweeping judgment over something. This is something where you should have informed consent about every single one of them.
And he just believes in personal choice. The term anti-vax, to me, to blanket statement put that on anyone who believes in more transparency and personal choice comes across as this is inflammatory rhetoric that we created to make people who want personal choice sound stupid and take away any nuance in the conversation to make it that two truths can exist. Vaccines can be a good thing, and we need more transparency around them.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of smoke and mirrors and hiding things when it comes to the reality of vaccine injury and the people that are negatively affected by vaccines. The mainstream narrative doesn't want you to know about how many people got vaccine injured or what happened to them, because it's going to make you more hesitant. But if you go into something blindly, that could potentially cause, I've known people that have gotten Bell's palsy, that have gotten heavy metal poisoning, that they have just perpetual brain fog. People die from vaccines. I don't want to sound, it's not crazy to say because it's true, but they don't tell you that information from the get-go, which I think is that's the part that he wants to change. He wants there to be more transparency, not to say that if you want the smallpox vaccine that you can't get it because vaccines aren't going to be available anymore. It's that you're going to get a list. You're going to be told these are the potential side effects of getting this vaccine. If you're okay with that, then we will give it to you.
Right. As opposed to kind of when you go to the pediatrician or when you go to the doctor right now, it's just, it's time for your vaccine. And it's very nonchalant with no real emphasis on side effects. Obviously, I shared in the last episode a little bit about my story with vaccines, but, I have a story with them that makes me slightly more biased, but it's important to me that people are aware of things that can happen.
It's not that much different than like applying for a loan or like buying a car. Like you go in and make a big decision and you get all the paperwork and they walk you through all of the terms and conditions. And if you consent, then you're going to sign. And then you are contractually obligated to fulfill those terms and conditions. With the vaccines, you're not always getting all of the terms and conditions ahead of time and making a decision with the full understanding of what could happen after you get that injection.
Another term I find really interesting is vaccine hesitancy, because it implies that if we tell people the truth, the cons, like you're saying, the side effects, or we tell people about the stories of people passing away from vaccines, it will cause vaccine hesitancy. Why is that a bad thing? Why is vaccine hesitancy based on the truth a bad thing? Like, do you see the narrative shaped around this?
Yeah. I mean, if you want me just to say it, it's bad for the bottom line of the company that's selling the vaccines.
Which, let's talk about the 1986 Act, which is something that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is very passionate about. And this act went into place to make it so that vaccine companies are not legally liable or held accountable for injuries and deaths. That's why we have things like the VICP, which pay out money to people who experience death and injury from the vaccines. It's a pool of money that basically creates a separation from legal liability for the vaccine companies themselves. Any company that is not held legally liable for their product should be further investigated. So my mom had 4 children. I was the 4th. In 1995, she had her 3rd. His name was Dean, and all of my mom's children at this point were on the vaccine schedule. And at 3 months old, a week before he turned 3 months, actually, Dean received the DPT vaccine. And this vaccine was the live virus version of the DPT, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. And that night, his legs swelled. He was inconsolable, very upset. And then the next day, my mom went to a party with family, and some people noticed that his head seemed unstable, or he seemed off, and were kind of making comments about him seeming like something was wrong. 6 days later, Dean passed away. He died, and his official cause of death was listed as sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, which is really just a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning we don't really have anything to blame it on, so it's SIDS. His autopsy, however, did reveal brain swelling and like nervous system swelling, or like nerve spinal swelling. My mom, like, obviously shaken by the experience of her child passing away and how close it was to him being vaccinated, and his obvious reaction to the vaccine that very day with the swelling, became a little bit more hesitant to vaccinate her other 2 children. I was not alive yet at this time, so I'm referring to my 2 older siblings. And because of this, her pediatrician served her a certified letter to her front door stating if she did not vaccinate her children, she would no longer be able to return to the practice. And my mom was forced to sign a document acknowledging the terms. There was not as much conversation around vaccines in the 90s as there are now. So that was 1995. In 1997, I was born. I'm her 4th child by this time. The DPT vaccine that Dean received had been taken off the market due to numerous reported adverse effects. It was replaced with what we now have today as the Tdap vaccine. So the difference is that this version has an acellular version. using a dead virus rather than the live virus of the 3 bacteria that I had previously mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And since my mom had been kicked out of her pediatrician's office for not wanting to vaccinate her children, she sought out a new doctor. And when she explained her hesitation to vaccinate me, her pediatrician proposed a solution to set aside a single vaccine vial, use it on other children for a month in the doctor's office. And if no adverse reactions were reported, then they would vaccinate me with the same vial. And after that month of no reported issues, I received the vaccine. That very night, I developed a rash all over my body, a white tongue, a very high fever, and became very weak. And she went to the doctor that night with me, and they told her that I had baby roseola and that it was a coincidence. The vaccine schedule says that another round needs to be 2 months later. So I went back 2 months later for a second dose. And that night I experienced the same thing: rash, white tongue, fever, weakness. My mom
Just a
went back to the
coincidence.
doctor, and that doctor provided documentation stating that I could never receive this vaccine again.
Ugh, I can't even imagine as a mother having to navigate that after losing a child and then trying to make the right decision for the other children that you have, when I'm sure she felt in her gut that she didn't want to do it.
Yeah, and the way that she described it to me was that she felt like doctors and people treated her like she was absolutely abusing her children. Like she would not feed her children by not giving them vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
And yet
especially
when,
them showing up at her door being like that's very like, I'm going to take your children away kind of vibes, you know?
yeah, well, and then when you do have a reaction telling her it's a coincidence, like,
Right.
what kind of medical gaslighting is that?
So I was kicked out of high school for not having that vaccine as well. My principal walked into my homeroom, called out my name, called me into the hallway, and said, "You need to leave school right now. You can go to the office and you have to call someone and leave school because you don't have this vaccine." So,
Just in the middle of the day?
and I ended up having to get a vaccine in order to go back to school. I was out of school for days, and they were not allowing me to go to public school if I didn't get it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's funny, actually, because now I'm remembering I grew up in a cul-de-sac, and the family directly across the street from us, I think they had 4 kids. They were all younger than me and my brother, but they didn't vaccinate their kids. And I think the dad was like a podiatrist. But I remember hearing that they had to like kind of jump through hoops to get the like religious exemption so that the kids could go to school. And I think that that was something that like repeatedly, like there was always pushback against. I'm sure they were just trying to push the schedule on them.
Right. And despite all of this, I just want to make another disclaimer. I absolutely believe that vaccines are a great thing. I think they are a beautiful medical advancement. I think they save lives. I think that it is a remarkable thing that we have in modern day society, in modern medicine, that we should all be grateful for, honestly. But I think there needs to be choices. And I think that there needs to be transparency. That's all.
I think that that's all. That's exactly it. That's all it comes down to, is just having all the information, having the choice, not being forced into doing something or coerced into doing something. So, not a vaccine denier.
Not a vaccine denier. He is not anti-vax. And I think it's important to listen to him when he says that. Like, Caroline and Caitlin are not the ones saying that. Like, he has made that. It's not that we're going to come out and speak for him, but he has shared multiple times that he believes that there are vaccine safety concerns and he would like there to be more safety precautions put in place. And I think that that sounds like a good thing to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you look at it that way, and I think that that's why uh, we wanted to lead with this one, because it's just such a tired story. Like, people keep throwing it around. He's denied it so many times and explained his stance, and yet they still continue to print that he is a vaccine denier, and a danger in that way. And I just don't think that that is true.
The Make America Healthy Again initiative that he has focused on has been way more than just vaccines. He has talked a lot about the food companies and their corruption and their involvement in the FDA and CDC, as well as pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot more to it than just vaccines. Since vaccines are a hot button topic, it's an easy button to push in these inflammatory articles, but there's much more that goes into it. And he's called a conspiracy theorist because he connects big food and big pharma's influence on the CDC and FDA, which guides America's food choices and pharmaceutical choices. And that is not a conspiracy. They are funded.
You have to wonder why somebody who is a career lawyer who has been litigating cases against these agencies might have some thoughts about the way they're doing things. I think that he does have some inside information and perspective. And I think that also leads us to the second thing that people are just freaking out about, is the fact that he's not a doctor and doesn't have a medical background. So that makes him unqualified to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. Many HHS secretaries have not been doctors, including Obama's Sylvia Burwell and Alex Azar, who served under Trump. They both had legal and business backgrounds. And our current health secretary under Biden, Xavier Becerra, is a lawyer and a politician. The role is about managing policy and overseeing public health initiatives, not performing surgeries or medical procedures. While some of that knowledge is helpful, that's not what the job is.
He's been a litigator for 40 years. It's not like that's like an easy feat or that's a hard job that you have to have a lot of intelligence for and capability.
And if you take the time, and I suggest you do this because this is something that I did with all of the nominees leading up to election season, but you have to take the time to actually listen to what he's saying. And when you hear him speak, whether he's giving a speech or he's doing an interview, he has amazing recall for information. Like, you can really, he's thrown so many different questions and topics, and he is able to bring up facts and figures and have a decisive standpoint on so many different topics, where, not gonna lie, there's lots of other politicians out there that have their main talking points and don't really have the ability to stray from them. He comes across, when you actually listen to him, as a very educated, capable individual.
The other thing is he's not a doctor. The roundtable conversations that he's had, the conferences he's hosting, he is time and time again positioning himself as a facilitator. When you watch them, he is bringing scientists together. He's bringing doctors together. He's bringing together surgeons, neurologists, psychologists, nutritionists, all of these experts together to facilitate the conversation and saying, here are some things, let's talk about it. And then he pretty much sits back and listens and takes note and allows the conversation to evolve. My point is, he's not spearheading this by himself with no smart experts around him.
I mean, he's got some of the most lauded doctors and nutritionists and scientists backing him. And I think that that should stand for something. And a lot of people tearing him down within the medical establishment, I think you just have to, they might be acting sincerely, but perhaps they have some other motivations, whether it's monetary or otherwise, for speaking against it. And, obviously there's never going to be one perfect solution for everything. We need to question everything that's happening, even if it is something that we are supportive of, you want to make sure that it's happening in the best possible way, not just steamrolling through and perhaps causing a loss for a certain group of people or something like that. Like, this is something that is happening, like you said, at a grassroots level, and there are lots of qualified people involved in these decisions that will come to pass.
Again, this is inflammatory rhetoric that's been used, that like experts and real doctors are the ones that aren't on RFK Jr.'s team. The doctors that are on his team or for the things that he's talking about aren't not real doctors. They have the same amount of schooling and experience as those other doctors who you are looking to. So yes, there's obviously a divide. Who is the expert and who is the real doctor and who is telling the truth is up for controversy.
Yeah, totally. And I think like just coming at it with an open mind and listening to what everybody has to say is just, that is you doing your due diligence, not just taking somebody else's word for it.
Right.
So this is actually something else that I saw being thrown around, that he will deny access to life-saving medication, which, I mean, I don't even know where, like, how is that going to happen? He doesn't have unilateral authority to restrict or deny access to medication. The only thing I can think of in relation to this is that there will be stricter expectations of pharmaceutical companies, but I don't think that doesn't mean that the medications are not going to be available to people that need them. Perhaps it means that they won't be able to advertise on TV anymore. I know that's something that's being floated. And if you don't already know this, we are one of 2 countries in the entire world that allows pharmaceutical advertising on TV. So I think, and this has been talked about in many different spaces, about how much pull the pharmaceutical industry has over our news media. And I think that is the main concern. And I think that is potentially something that could be changing with the coming transition of power.
Right.
But not denial of life-saving medication.
Right. And I have heard conversations during the conferences that I listened to, podcasts of people around him talking about like medication swaps. For example, I know Callie Means discusses the financing of Ozempic. They're trying to get that approved by Medicaid for children as young as 6 years old. And that costs about $1,600 a month. So something that they were discussing was, can we give a 6-year-old $1,600 worth of organic food a month rather than the medication with the side effects that they would be then hooked on for life? And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying these are the conversations that are going around. There's been also inflammatory conversations about how Make America Healthy Again is not actually making America healthy again, because they're only focusing on trendy food bans rather than socioeconomic struggles. And I just do not see that as true. Every time I have truly listened in, I have seen true economic proposals as it relates to Medicaid, as it relates to access to organic food, regenerative farming. I think it all ties together, and I don't think that is left out of the conversation.
No, I don't think that you can untangle them either, because even if you're thinking about somewhere that's like a food desert, and I've been in neighborhoods in Chicago where the only place to get food in a walking distance is the corner store. And what is on the shelf in the corner store? A bunch of packaged foods with seed oils and artificial sweeteners in them. If we are removing those from our food supply, something else has to be put on the shelf there. They're going to be stocking something different. These companies are going to have to come up with an alternative product if they want to continue to compete and survive in the market. I think these policy changes are in everybody's best interest.
Like Black Americans, people of color in America, are more targeted by companies like Coca-Cola and Kellogg's, and that Medicaid dollars literally subsidize Coca-Cola for families on SNAP.
Yeah.
We cannot
Lots
be
of
telling
conflicts of interest.
families on SNAP that Coca-Cola is a nutritious option. We don't want to ban Coca-Cola. Like Callie Mean says, Coca-Cola should be a thing because we live in America and we should always have those options, but it shouldn't be subsidized by the government.
No, it's a private company. It should remain that way. And maybe they should use cane sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. If it's good enough for Mexico, it's good enough for us.
Right. Right.
Well, another thing that as soon as Trump got elected, so many people were saying that we've been bamboozled because he's not going to keep his promises and keep RFK around. Like, he's not going to last in the Trump administration. And I just, based off of like, since they joined forces over the summer, since RFK endorsed Trump, they have been a united front for as far as I can tell. It seems that RFK is influential in that circle, and he wanted to be Health and Human Services Secretary, and he held out for that role. And Trump made good on it. And I think evidence of him being committed to keeping him around is that President Trump actually said that he is getting pushback from pharmaceutical companies about not keeping RFK around, and he's not listening to them. He nominated him as Health and Human Services Secretary. He seems committed to me.
We are going to approach this using the same critical thought that we applied ourselves to get to this place. I don't even know if I want to talk about this. For example, I can cut it out if it's bad. For example, the McDonald's photo was something that I don't love, like, personally. I think it was like a bad move, a poor choice, and I think it gave press to McDonald's. It gave them, it made me crave McDonald's for like a week, and I don't want that.
I almost went to McDonald's when I got groceries because it was in the parking lot and I could smell the fries. And I was like, no.
And like, what? Like, who are we? Like, we don't eat McDonald's, but RFK posted a photo with me. But that's how powerful this is the point. And I think if we're going to talk smack against all these corporations and talk about the dangers of them and all these things, we can't be posting like photos of us eating them. So all that to say, like, I'm not going to be one of those people who are coming out saying, I love the work that RFK Jr. is doing, but I will blindly accept him when he does things wrong. Like, no, I will not blindly accept that. So, and I think that's a positive. Like, I think being a critical thinker and holding people accountable through this entire process, if they drop the ball, we will say that.
It's not like we have to just like bow down to them. We need to, as the people, have critique, constructive criticism. That's how things get better. And I think one of the like overarching things that we all need to remember is that as sovereign individuals, we have the power of choice, and most likely a lot of these policies won't necessarily affect you if you are already eating locally and eating a primarily whole food, protein-rich diet. The motivation here, I think, is to continue to empower people to take health into their own hands. Right now, there are so many vices and crutches in our society that make us unhealthy or make us reliant on the medical industry. Like, I don't want to be 60 years old and on 12 different medications. I'm doing as much as I can now to remain healthy so that I don't have to lean on the medical system, rely on pharmaceuticals so much. But the way things are constructed right now, it's like a funnel. It's like a vacuum that sucks you right in as soon as, like, you know, something is wrong. And unless you start to really take control of your life and make decisions for yourself, you're kind of like spiraling through that funnel for a really long time. So I think just a lot of the policy changes that we are going to see are to effectively empower the people.
Right. And the
with their
only
health.
thing anti that I am when it comes to vaccines is I'm anti the tyranny that is controlling information. Like, the only reason that we would use terms like vaccine hesitancy and be so upset when people want to talk about not only the benefits of pharmaceuticals, but the risks and the side effects is if we really, really want to control that people do the thing we want them to do, which is to take the vaccine and to take the pharmaceutical at all costs. That is controlling information, and it is controlling people's behavior. And that is what I'm opposed to.
I 100% agree. Well, let's talk about the last claim. One side here has abortion was a big topic in this election, but for the majority, it was not the main issue, mostly because it has already been come down to the state's level. It is not a federal issue anymore.
Right. So this election actually, regardless of how I feel about it, it didn't affect the abortion issue.
I mean, I'm pro-choice. That's something, the my body, my choice thing. I think that applies across the board. I can agree with that sentiment. And as HHS secretary, he will not have the authority to change or create laws, including abortion. And I think, I've kind of been having flashbacks to like elementary school history classes and social studies classes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when our country was created, the intention was for the state to really govern the people that lived there, not the federal government. The federal government is there as like oversight.
That's what keeps us from being a fascist, tyrannical country, is because we have so many checks and balances, because we have government at the state level.
Maybe we should be paying more attention to our state elections, our state politics. If that is, if these are issues that you're really concerned with, start within your state, within your community. Agency and accountability is so important here. And this goes back to like our education as young women. Like I got the period talk in 5th grade, at school, and it was not a great talk. Like the information was not conveyed very well. I don't think that there was really a lot of prep involved in it, but you get that talk in 5th grade, and then you get a talk in freshman year of high school health class or something like that. That's like the sex talk and the STD talk, but nobody is telling you that you can naturally monitor your fertility and prevent pregnancy, that you have the autonomy and control over your body, and you don't need to rely on a pharmaceutical to prevent pregnancy, and you don't necessarily need to rely on a procedure because you can control it in the first place. But is it a great thing that it is available when, circumstances call for it? Yes. But I think that we all need, the whole thing, this whole conversation today, I think brings it back to just everyone needs to take more personal responsibility for themselves.
Right. Yeah. Personal agency is huge. Like, once you tap into personal agency and taking control and empowering yourself in your own life, then these kind of things sort of unravel for you, because then there's moments when you feel that you don't have a choice. For instance, with me, like with the vaccine things, you realize like there are players in our government and in our life that want us to not have control of things. And that is when we as the people fight back. And that is what we also saw with so many women fighting back against abortion, the idea of abortion laws being illegal. Like, why? Because you want control over your own body. That's the point.
Totally. Yeah. And that's not something that's going to go away. There's nothing, I'm not getting tyrannical energy from RFK. I don't think that is his goal in getting in there. I think it's really to help the American people. And sometimes it's hard to see when you're so entwined in a certain way of being and a certain understanding of how things work, it's hard to see that there might be another way. But like we said at the beginning, multiple things can be true at once.
Exactly. So all that said, we hope that this conversation helped you to like cut through some of the noise. Maybe next time you read an inflammatory article with lots of rhetoric like vaccine denier, anti-vax, conspiracy theory things, you'll kind of think twice about what those words mean. And really, if you're interested in the MAHA movement, you'll actually watch some of the conferences, roundtables, listen to the podcasts that RFK has been on, and some of the other experts that he has in his corner, like Casey Means, Callie Means, Max Lugavere, Dr. Jordan Peterson, Dr. Chris Palmer, the list goes on. But there's a lot of other people in this movement too.
Yep. Do your own research.